Our next panel will delve into some of the dilemmas arising when investing in industries with high emissions, negative environmental impact, or challenging working conditions. This discussion will be contextualized by two cases from Norfund's investees. Before we invite a leader to the stage to moderate this session, please have a look at this video.
In Ghana here, we're really excited to be a part of this journey, embarking on projects that can help us make the cement industry a lot greener.
Cement is a vital input in generating economic growth and creating the jobs needed to combat poverty in developing countries. But the production of cement is also one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. Most of the emissions come from producing clinker, the main ingredient in cement. But with new technology developed by FL Smith, clinker can be substituted with calcined clay. In Ghana, Norfund and IFU have co-invested with CBI and FL Smith to install the world's largest calcined clay facility, reducing the emissions from the cement production by up to 20%.
The main base of cement is clinker, which is in Ghana not available and therefore imported from foreign countries at a very expensive cost.
We're able to substitute 30% of the clinker that we currently use in making cement with locally produced calcined clay.
Calcined clay is going to be produced out of clay, sourced in Ghana, locally 100 kilometers from the plant we are currently operating. This is a widely available resource.
We're excited to be a part of writing a new chapter in the production of cement. This time it's trying to make it with a consciousness for the environment and trying to do something that can benefit generations. The most obvious benefit is the construction that's going to take place over the next couple of years. There are hundreds of jobs that are being created, but that's just the beginning.
We decided to go with a bigger plant than's only our need because we are trying to push the industry to change. Construction has already started. We have one plant with a grinding station. We will have a second grinding station and the flash calciner located in the same area.
There is a need for increased infrastructure in Ghana. By expanding our production capacity, we are also meeting this increasing demand for cement as a construction material.
I was born and raised right here in Ghana, and being a part of the largest calcined clay project with the flash calciner in the world, it's that CO2, that big number that we anticipate reducing our footprint by, that really excites and motivates us all on this journey.
CBI, that you just saw in the video, is a Ghanaian-based company that Norfund invested in 2022. It's an example that illustrates well some of the dilemmas that Norfund faces when investing in businesses that operate in sectors with high ESG risks. We will shortly hear more from CBI before giving the floor to another of Norfund's investees that also faces challenges when it comes to environmental and social issues, the apparel manufacturer Hela. This will then be followed by a discussion with Anja Bakken-Riise, leader of Future in Our Hands, and Ellen Rasmussen, EVP of Scalable Enterprises in Norfund. Now, as the effects of climate change are becoming more present, the need to transition to net zero and decarbonization is increasingly on the agenda. But what happens when industries vital for development are also high carbon emitters? To be honest, this was a question that was discussed extensively in Norfund when the opportunity to invest in CBI was presented. Could we really have net zero ambitions and simultaneously invest in a cement plant? To get us better acquainted to CBI and how they consider some of these dilemmas, please welcome to the stage Kobe Adams, Commercial Director of CBI in Ghana.
Thank you very much, Alida. And yes, we do think it's possible to invest simultaneously in a cement manufacturer while holding net zero ambitions. But we think it requires looking at an old problem through a fresh set of eyes. So I'm Kobe Adams. I'm the Commercial Director at CBI Ghana. I joined the business in 2017, and I'm here to share with you our journey, the lessons that we've learned, and some of the challenges that we've encountered as we try to transition through this difficult phase. But first, I'll talk a little bit about our business. CBI is a family-owned business located in Tema in Ghana. We have 250 employees, and we launched in 2018 a cement grinding plant which produced 600,000 tons of cement annually. And in 2021, something incredible happened. We exceeded the plant capacity because there was so much demand for cement. At that point, we faced a profound choice. So we could be conservative and build on a 200-year technology of producing OPC. What we would do was we would install a new mill and produce cement the same way that we would continue to have emissions and just do the same way that all of our competitors were expanding. But there was another alternative. We could choose to be audacious and try something different to give us a competitive edge. So what we did in the end was we chose audacity, and we decided to build the world's largest calcined clay plant in Tema. The reasons were that it would allow us to significantly reduce the production costs by substituting 30% of clinker, which is the main culprit in CO2 emissions. We would also support the local economy by increasing local sourcing and creating skilled local jobs. And lastly, we would reduce CO2 emissions significantly. Finally, by producing more than 3 times the amount of calcined clay cement that we needed for our plant, we could also encourage the industry to change by bringing many of our competitors along on the journey in transitioning to a cleaner future. So for an investor like Norfund, our calcined clay project aligned with many of the values and ticked several boxes. It was the increase in local sourcing, the value add opportunities, skilled job creation, and CO2 reduction. But for the uninitiated, maybe I can explain a little bit about why the cement industry has so much criticism. So for every ton of cement that is produced, there's about 650 kilograms of CO2 emitted, and this comes from the chemical process of producing clinker. The combustion, which is used to heat clay and limestone up to about 1,400 Celsius, and the power that's used to grind this clinker into cement. By making limestone calcined clay cement, which is popularly called LC3, we have the opportunity to reduce our carbon dioxide footprint by up to 20%. By substituting up to 30% of the clinker that we use in OPC for calcined clay, which is a raw material that is readily available in Ghana. And this is a journey that we've chosen to go on, which we've been joined on by Norfund and many of our partners. Some of the biggest challenges that we faced, which I'm going to tell you about briefly, are the regulatory barriers, market acceptance, the expanded operating model in doing something extra on top of whatever we're doing, and the limited access to carbon markets. So on the regulatory side, the main challenge that we've had has been to convince our regulator to sanction LC3. So in summary, there are 6 types of cement, right? And because this is made by engineers, they named them SEM1, SEM2, SEM3, SEM4, SEM5, SEM6. So we came with a SEM7, which is a different type of cement which uses much less carbon dioxide. And in order to encourage them, convince them that this was safe for public consumption, we needed to take them on a journey. First, with academics and research, we engaged many people in Lausanne, where the LC3 technology originated. We've been having many public hearings and gatherings with the Ghana Standards Authority and other regulatory and research institutions. Last week, we had a big forum in Kumasi, which is Ghana's second city. And lastly, also by partnering with many of our competitors in the market. So Heidelberg is the market leader in Ghana. They have 40% of the cement market share. And by having an offtake agreement so that they can also begin to produce LC3, they joined us in trying to convince the regulator that this was safe and that it worked. On the market side as well, we anticipate many challenges with encouraging the people to consume LC3. Why? Well, first, because carbon dioxide and emissions are very low on the radar and the Ghanaian social consciousness. It's not as relevant and present an issue as it is in many other parts of the world, and there's a general lack of awareness. But in addition to that, people are generally skeptical of products and services that they don't know, and there isn't necessarily an inherent trust for locally produced products. So promoting environmental sustainability becomes the main challenge that we're set out to overcome. First, by demonstrating the local benefits, the fact that this reduces the level of imports, that we're creating jobs, and that we're partnering with local Ghanaian communities becomes very important. Secondly, by emphasizing the product quality, because coincidentally, LC3 does perform similarly, or in some cases even above the level and the standards of OPC cement, which is predominant in the market, and that becomes very important to let people understand. And then finally, letting them understand the environmental proposition of LC3 becomes very important. So in a nutshell, we really see ourselves on this journey as pioneers in the Ghanaian market, trying to nurture that environmental consciousness and bring it more to the fore, and then over time igniting what we think can be a spirit of environmental action and bringing the whole of the community, the whole of the country, potentially the whole of the continent along with us in changing the way that we operate. Another set of challenges that we anticipate are with the operational scope. So up until now, our current operating model has been around sourcing and importing clinker, which we would grind into OPC. But going forward, once we launch the plant, there's the need to create a whole new supply chain. First, we're going to have to find a mine, transport clay, 70 kilometers, 60 trucks, 50 to 60 trucks a day, and then calcine that clay before making our LC3 cement. So this is something that brings along with it opportunities to partner with local communities, creating much higher skilled jobs, and some jobs that don't exist a lot in the world today. And lastly, there's the problem of the market access. And this is kind of interesting because, well, if you think about the Paris Agreement in 2015 laid out the framework for countries to begin trading carbon credits, right? And for CBI, this actually hasn't been a problem because given the high expense of bringing clinker to Ghana, it made sense already to do the project. But where we think the risk lies is in countries who today have the option to choose OPC and continue polluting or picking the cleaner alternatives, where their inability to contribute and to trade in carbon credits in the more mature European trading emissions system might prove a barrier to bringing more countries along and letting them progress along the journey towards creating cleaner cement. So in a nutshell, what we see as the opportunities in the face of these challenges have been trying to build alliances and bring stakeholders along on the journey in combating or fighting against the regulatory barriers, driving market acceptance by educating customers and championing sustainability, and then managing the broader operational scope, investing in talent, expanding our supply chain, and focusing on quality. And then finally, investing for the long term as we try to prove the business model and inspire other cement manufacturers to produce cement, but in a cleaner, more environmentally conscious way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobe. And we will see Kobe back on stage in a little bit. But first, I would like to introduce our second case. Hela Apparel Holdings is an apparel manufacturer with manufacturing facilities in Sri Lanka, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Norfund invested in Hela at the start of this year with the aim of expanding Hela's operations in Kenya, contributing to the creation of jobs and industrial growth. However, the textile industry does have a reputation for bad ESG practices, including poor working conditions and high water and energy use. To shed some light on this industry and Hela's approach to addressing some of these challenges, please welcome to the stage Dilanka Jinodasa, Group CEO of Hela.
Thank you, Alida, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Norfund, for inviting me to speak at this forum. Before I start, I just want to quickly touch on this slide. Last night, there was a few mentions around the focus of Norfund, being around addressing poverty and, of course, sustainability. And I was very happy to see that because that's the exact same criteria that we have as a company. We call ourselves a social capital focused company with 3 key criteria around equity, inclusivity, and climate stability. And over the next few slides, I'll kind of touch on how we address those areas. But quickly, a quick recap around Hela. We generate about $300 million in revenue across the 4 countries that Elida mentioned. 10 manufacturing facilities hiring about 17,000 employees. But this wasn't always the case. Just 10 years ago, back in 2012, we were generating $3 million with a workforce of less than 1,000 people solely focused around Sri Lanka. So it's safe to say Africa has really been the catalyst for our growth. Over the years, we've kind of evolved our offering with design and innovation offices in New York, in London, and then the latest being in France, so that they are able to feed into our headquarters in Sri Lanka and the manufacturing facilities with the latest trends and designs. What has Africa really brought to us? Each country that we have a presence in has a completely different value proposition. From mass manufacturing coming out of our Ethiopian facility, supported by its large populations, and of course, global duty-free agreements covering access from the West in Canada. I mean, US used to be covered, but recently lost it, to Europe, UK, and most parts of Asia, including India, China, Japan, Korea, and even Australia. So for global brands, it's that ideal hotspot for one-stop manufacturing. Kenya, with its infrastructure, language, English is widely spoken in Kenya, allowing us to train middle management a lot more easily, and of course, much more consistent infrastructure helps us with operational consistency. And Egypt, with its geographical advantage and supply chain availability, is a great destination for quick response. And as you know, fashion is all about time. And with Egypt, we can access Europe within 3 to 7 days, depending on which part of Europe, and then of course the US within 12 days. Just to give you some context, when you airlift a product out of Sri Lanka, it still takes you 5 days, but we can do it in a lot more sustainable fashion out of Egypt by sending it by sea in just 12 days, and a meaningful cost option as well. Having entered Kenya 7 years ago, Ethiopia 6 years ago, and then Egypt just 18 months ago, we've kind of harnessed the first mover advantage, and today we are very proud to say that we're the largest in Kenya, largest apparel exporter in Kenya. We're the largest exporter in Ethiopia. In both those countries, 1 out of 5 garments that gets exported is from a Hela facility. And after just 18 months, we have now been placed as the 12th largest exporter in Egypt, and we hope to move up the rankings over the next few months. Below here, you will also see how our revenue has grown. And if you recall, we do $300 million now. So this year, Africa will account for over 50% of the revenue that we generate as a company. And that's not because Sri Lanka has shrunk for us, it's because Africa has grown at a much faster pace compared to the rest of the regions that we have a presence in. But when you speak to a lot of the apparel manufacturers in the region, you would hear mixed results on the experiences, be it a manufacturer or even a retailer. Why is Hela different? I strongly believe it was from our approach, and it was really built on a foundation of empathy. We didn't try to emulate what worked for us in Sri Lanka over in Africa. We didn't try to blanket copy-paste what worked in China or the Far East over in Africa. We first tried to understand the local context and then try to give bespoke solutions to navigate through that local environment. I won't touch on all the examples here, but I'll mention a few. One which will always stay close to me is Ethiopia. When the industry was starting up, there was a very general misconception that in the morning hours, your output is lower, your efficiency was lower, people were lazy. But then when we really dug into it, what we really understood was that there was a huge deficiency in iron in the Ethiopian people's diet. So what we did was we gave free meals which was heavy in iron and other vital nutrients, and then saw the results, and voila, today it's one of the most efficient. I'm not saying it's purely because of that, but it was that bespoke solution we gave using a foundation of empathy that allowed us to unlock it. Another example I would touch on is our Freshie, a freshwater program in Kenya. Over the first initial months, what we found out through our surveys was that our employees would walk 7 kilometers per day to get access to fresh water after their 8-hour shift. So what we did in return was we started giving jerry cans of water to every employee after their shift so that that water fetch is eliminated from their daily routine. Similarly, we started giving free meals, free healthcare, we have a creche facility, all with the mindset of, okay, how do we take off the burdens that they have in their day-to-day life so that when they come to work, they're happy, they're fresh, and they're focused. And today, our attrition rate in Kenya is at about 0.8% per month, and this is almost a 5,000 people plant. Industry average, again, to give you some context, is about 5 to 6%. So again, empathy and bespoke solutions catered towards the ground situation in the countries that you operate in. Touching on sustainable manufacturing, what we really wanted to emulate was that Africa is typically perceived as a low and slow manufacturing destination, so low in value addition, slow in lead time, and we wanted to change that from the get-go. So, for example, when we set up our facility in Africa, in Ethiopia, we started making ladies' underwear, constructed, molded bras. That is a product that is typically manufactured in China, a little bit in Vietnam, but of course, very close to home in Sri Lanka. Would a normal manufacturer produce such a technically complicated garment in Africa, especially in Ethiopia, where a person hasn't seen a sewing machine, let alone, a bra potentially? But that strategy paid off. Today we ship close to 2.5 million pieces a month to brands such as Calvin Klein, to European lingerie brands like Dim and Etam. So again, bringing French European lingerie into Ethiopia and unlocking it using this foundation that we've built. Circular solutions is, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have in your toolbox these days. And we've spearheaded that with Africa, with our Kenyan facility, working with a Belgian recycler. So using all our pre-consumer waste, shipping it over there, convert it back into yarn, back into fabrics, and then back into a garment, closing that particular loop. And our next phase is to convert used garments back into fabrics and closing the loop in that manner as well. Thanks to the support of Norfund, we've also started now developing the regional supply chain. And we kind of approached this differently. The easiest would have been to bring world-class leading supply chain partners over to the region. But that would have taken time, and it might have not been sustainable because what's the point of having a complete international solution when there is good talent locally as well? So what we did was we reached out to existing manufacturers who were catering to the local market, especially in Tanzania. That was our most successful case. We gave them the technical input, now financing, and a guaranteed order book to help them elevate their standards from compliance, quality, sustainability, and then now they have shifted. Not only do they service the local markets, but now they're producing fabrics for the likes of Calvin Klein. So again, a proud feat for them as well. All this backed by ISO certified life cycle assessment surveys, where our customers can track the carbon footprint of every product that is manufactured out of our manufacturing facilities in Africa. Some of the challenges that's faced by Hela or any apparel manufacturer that enters Africa, and it is to be expected because these are frontier markets and you will have frontier market-based challenges. Right now, the need of the hour is demand security. We are living in an environment where there is depressed demand. So how do you ensure that your capacities are running at optimum, given that it's a very high fixed cost-based industry? Funding lines is definitely a major challenge, or has been, till the support of Norfund. And this doesn't necessarily relate to the balance sheet strength of the particular company, but the perceived country risks that we operate in. And this has now been unlocked. And then, of course, building supply chains. And like I said, building from scratch might take you 2-3 years. So that's how we've kind of mitigated by working with existing players and elevating them for international standards. Finding new solutions in this challenging environment. supply chain is, again, like I mentioned at the start, something that we're really proud of. I'm not sure any of you are aware, but Tanzania, for example, is the 6th largest grower of organic cotton in the world. But the level of value addition that happens in Tanzania is extremely limited. So everything that's harvested gets exported to the likes of Turkey, to India, gets spun into yarn, made into fabrics, and then shipped back into Africa to be converted to a garment. So what we've done is we've started working with the cotton farmers, we've started working with the government to produce chinneries, brought in certain technical partners to work with local players to build their spinning technology, expand the capacity of the knitting, and then guaranteed buyback by Hela to manufacture them into garments, reducing the scope 2 emissions from a carbon footprint standpoint, unlocking lead times, unlocking costs, and giving supply chain security, which was, as we saw, a very important piece of the puzzle during the COVID era. Another subject that came into mind by Pia last night, where she mentioned some of the key things that you should do in a high inflationary environment, and we operate in countries which all are going through high inflationary macro conditions, ranging from official figures of 40 to 90%. Something which we did was we invested into technology. We invested into SAP, building a solid foundation for us to operating on, allowing APIs, RPAs to help agility and take off mundane tasks. We invested into automation by partnering with French companies like Lectra, where certain support functions, such as cutting, movement of goods, is completely taken out, allowing us to reallocate resources from non-value-adding activities to more value-adding activities. We are also working with the team here to work on local developments, because we strongly believe that we need local middle management and top management to be viable. And then, of course, vertical integration. In this case, we are trying to move more towards the consumer by partnering with our customers so that it gives us demand security, it gives them supply chain security, and end-to-end, they focus on the front end whilst we focus on the back end. So those are some of the solutions which we are working on with Norfund, and excited to answer any questions you may have at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilanka. And we'll also see Dilanka back on stage in a little bit. But first, I would like to invite to the stage Anja Bakken-Riise from Future in Our Hands and Ellen Rasmussen from Norfund.
Hi.
Perhaps we can start with you, Anja. So you lead a civil society organization that has worked a lot with working conditions and environmental impacts. So what has your experience been in Future in Our Hands in working with some of these challenges?
Well, first, when we move on to commenting on these particular examples, I must say, I would really have liked to see Norfund invite some civil society representatives from these local communities who would be the best to speak about how they are conceived and perceived there. But there's no question about it. We work particularly on the textiles industry, and it's extremely complex and extremely difficult. Sure, we all need clothing, but what we see today is that this industry stands for about 8% of the world's CO2 emissions, a high use of chemicals. We use up, cotton in itself. It takes up about 4% of the world's agricultural lands, but use about 16% of the pesticides. And then, of course, the high volume increase within the textile industry comes from using of cheap synthetic fabric. So it's oil, and we see that the oil and gas industry are kind of promoting the use of synthetics in our items because of the energy transition. They see they need to find new markets for oil and gas. And so we have all these environmental issues in this industry, and also, of course, a high pressure on the workers coming from the fast fashion business model. This way of of using and disposing of items at a very quick pace, it leads to an extreme pressure on the workers. And so for me, looking at this particular industry, I would say if you are an investor and you're going to invest, you need to look for the companies who are driving the race to the top. We need to put an end to yesterday's business models that are driven on high volumes and low return per item, moving on to, you know, more sustainable. We're not going to get to sustainable fashion. There is no such thing. It's just a matter of less environmentally damaging than the other. So, but then of course, what fabrics we use is important, but and the materials that we use and that goes into it is important, but the biggest issue is reducing volume and keeping what we have as long as possible. And I'm curious to know what Norfund has been thinking when it comes to, you know, that shift, moving away from volume to reducing the number of garments and items that you're selling, because that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, great. So fast fashion, pressure on workers, high chemicals, the issues are complex and there are many. So maybe, Ellen, if you could shed some light on what goes through the Norfund's decision-making process when we're looking at investments like these, and what we consider, as to Anja's point here, when it comes to reducing quantities as well.
Quite a challenge, yeah. So thank you, Lida, and thank you, Anna. So let me just start by saying, how do we work in Norfund? So it starts with people, right? So we have about half of the investment people, they're based in Oslo, and the rest of the half is in the markets where we invest. And that is a crucial important for us to make good investment decisions. So when we get an investment opportunity, we put together a mix of people to assess the opportunity. So what typically happens is that, you know, I'm Norwegian, I'm based in Norway, there is an investment opportunity in, let's say, textiles, cement, cocoa, challenging, and I would think, oh, risky. And then, you know, you take a deep breath, then we talk to the local teams. And they say, but Ellen, shouldn't we be able to produce our clothes in Africa? Shouldn't we be able to produce our cement? You know, what's this? And then it comes back to what is our mission? And it is to create jobs and improve jobs, create jobs and improve lives in a sustainable way. So that is kind of where we're coming from on this. What we, of course, always need to make sure is that we stay within or outside the EDFA exclusion lists. So there are certain things we will not do, and that goes also on the fossil fuel exclusion list. Then when we have an investment opportunity, we need to do a very deep and proper due diligence investigation of this investment opportunity. Most critical, who is the partner? Is that a partner that we have the same ambitions, we have the same ultimate goal? That is absolutely key. Is it someone we can work with? Secondly, what is their ESG standards? What's the status? What about the financial situation? What about tax? What about legal? What about the operations? People side is of course, an inclusive part of the ESG. We don't do this to say because we only look for the perfect investments. We say we do this because we need to understand the risks and we need to understand how we can mitigate them. We cannot tick the boxes. We need to understand that we embark on a journey. So in that, in a sense, we do accept transition risks, meaning that we invest in companies that are not where we would, at the standards we would like them to be, but we believe we can do that journey together. In that also, what is crucial for us is to have the dialogue with the likes of The Future in Our Hands and others, because we get very, very important feedback to make sure that we capture as much of the risks before we invest. Because it's before we invest, we can really align on the action plan. What do we need to make sure happens to that investment, that production, to move it to be future-proof? So that's two kind of things we do is, one, make sure it's a partner. Spend time with the partner before you invest. Do we know it? Are we aligned? And then secondly, work into the agreements. What needs to be in place before we pay? And if they do not live up to what we should do, then what are the opportunities to call back the loan or in other ways exit and say that we cannot make this work. So that's just a few points. Yeah, please.
Please comment.
Yeah, because I think that's very important, that the kind of expectations that you share with your investees. And for instance, I mean, we're all expecting now of responsible investors to have a tangible plan for net zero. You know, and what we would expect from someone like Norfund is to have, to demand, basically, credible and quantifiable targets and plans from the investees of how to get, how to be in line with the Paris Agreement, and to have some sort of a mechanism in place. You know, in Norway we say "rise bak speilet," to say that you can actually, we will not continue investing with you if you do not follow up these plans in a decent way. And I also think, but so, of course, there is risk. What Norfund is doing, it is risky.
Yeah.
And so you have to accept some sort of a risk. But without those concrete plans, I would say that to invest in these intensive emission-related industry is too risky. And I also just wanted to add on what the UN, the IPCC, the climate panel is saying, and being very clear about how we need to see the interconnectedness of cutting emissions, of taking care of nature, but also achieving the UN development goals. And so sometimes, from what I'm hearing on stage here, we talk a lot about job creation, but you know, it's a common saying in the trade unions: there are no jobs on the dead planet. So we need to look at these things in line to both be able to cut emission, take care of the environment, while also working on job creation.
And I do agree on that. But if you want to go green, you have to get your hands dirty. And I think that's what we're willing to do. So it's not always so that we can do an investment and we know the whole path. Not even in Norway, nowhere. But we know the ambition, we know the target, and we then need to work alongside partners, like-minded partners, to get there. And you know, that's what I really enjoy working in Norfund, is that we do take that risk, because I think we, you know, as investors in Africa, we need to take as a point of departure what is the investment universe. And then to say, and with whom can we work, and who do we think we can do that transition to be future-proof? And so typically, if we do like an investment, whether it's CBI or Hela or others, we would like what we have an environmental and social action plan linked to the agreements, which could sometimes be lengthy, not so lengthy, depending on the situation. Some of them need to be achieved before we pay out, as I said. Some things we say is less critical, and it can take after 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc. We need to accept that it takes time, and sometimes more time than what we thought initially. But as long as we see progress, as long as there's a willingness, it is our job to be there and to be patient alongside the partners. And I can assure you that we share the ambition and the vision to for the planet, and also making sure that we, as was explained by the chair and by our CEO, we invest for profit. That means that if we invest in a business that ultimately is not delivering on our environmental goals, is not being future-proof, there will be no exit for us. So this is, yeah.
If I could just jump in there for a little bit. So now that we've made clear, Norfund will make these investments, but how can then NGOs such as Anja's better support and guide Norfund in making the correct decisions when it comes to these investments?
Yeah, so, well, I would say continue to challenge. That's super important. And the future in our hands have an insight which is invaluable to us. And I do appreciate the type of dialogue that we do have when we do these type of investments. So I think that's one. So challenge, but also share ideas. Or if you come across something where you say, maybe that could be something for that particular investment, or just maybe for Norfund to have. So I think that's important. There's also a third element, and that is, what can we do together? So you mentioned a bit some of these large global companies, and they have large ambitions. They promote, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with this much and recyclability this much. But to what degree do they actually push those goals down to the business units and enable them to work alongside the supply chain to deliver on it? I think that is a huge challenge in the fast-moving consumer goods and in the textile business, and there is something we could do together.
Thank you. And just being mindful of time here, just a final question for you, Anja. What are your concrete recommendations for Norfund? Any examples of how we should approach these kinds of industries that we know now are so challenging?
Well, I think in general, I would say, we need a lot more policy. So I'm not thinking that investors are going to save the world, but you can move things faster and quicker in the right direction. But invest in tomorrow's business models and not yesterday's. And especially when it comes to the textile industry, we need a big push from investors such as Norfund. And so I'm very happy to continue and push and challenge you. And I think also listen to the local needs. What we've seen in the areas around the economic production zones, such as one of those that Hela is investing in, often we see a lot of pressure on the right to unionize. We see often quite poor working conditions. I'm not going to speak of Hela, but that's a general trend. And so to have a dialogue with the unions on the ground, with the local civil society representatives, and always make sure that they are involved before you make your decision to invest.
A lot of good recommendations that will be important to keep in mind, but I'm afraid we are out of time right now. So thank you to Anja from Future in Our Hands and Ellen from Norfund.
Thank you.
And we will now invite Dilanka and Kobe back onto the stage so that they can comment on what they have just heard in this panel. So perhaps we can start with you, Dilanka. There was a lot of mention of the textile industries. So what reflections have you made after hearing this conversation? And is there anything you would like to follow up or comment on?
Sure. I think Anja made a lot of valid points about investing in tomorrow's technologies and tomorrow's industry. And I kind of touched on it in my presentation as well. I think circularity is a huge solution for the carbon, the impact the industry has. People will always need clothes, but how do we change the process? How do we change the methodology to maybe not get to a zero impact, but to a low impact from where it is currently? And like I mentioned, 4 or 5 years ago, we spearheaded the pre-consumer waste, and the ultimate goal is to have post-consumer waste so that each garment is circularized over and over again. And at the same time, in parallel, to combat fast fashion, we don't work with any fast fashion brands, but it's not that we will never work with them. What we will bring to the table is the life cycle of a particular garment. Right now, most fast fashion brands might have 4 or 5 washers or 4 or 5 users per item. Most of ours pass, I would say 99% plus would pass 25 washes, but how do we make it 50, 100 so that the longevity increases and the number of units that are bought comes down over the years? And then as for the point made on freedom of association, all our facilities, other than in Egypt, purely because it's a fairly new one for us, is unionized. We work very closely in conjunction with the union, so that their feedback and input is always factored into the decisions that we make, and we welcome anyone, any association to come and have a discussion with them to get some context of what's happening on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. And how about you, Kobe? How do these conversations compare to what you hear in Ghana?
Well, I think broadly speaking, to generalize and respond what I heard from Anja, I think so long as we can agree on the problems and in principle agree that moving forward long term, there are changes that we need to make in the business models that we're operating to make them more socially sustainable. And so long as we partner with Norfund and the investees and work on them in the long term, I think we're in a pretty good place. We have an environmental social action plan, so that resonated as I heard Ellen talk about it. And I think what we have is a shared commitment and a shared sense of purpose to work and push this. Because left on their own, many of these businesses probably will not, 10, 15 years down the line, be working in a more sustainable fashion. But having partners like Norfund who will push the agenda and who will support us with know-how and be partners, I think puts us in the best possible place long term to have a more sustainable business relationship.
And do either of you have any wishes for either investors like Norfund or any NGOs like Future in Our Hands for how they can best support you in doing this work going forward?
Yeah, I mean, spearheading new technology always has a higher risk than tried and tested methodologies. Co-investing at the infancy stage will help kind of stomach that lower ROIs you would have when you are partaking in and backing that sort of technology. So having DFIs in your investor pool to co-invest with you definitely helps and give it the critical mass to make it commercially viable. So we expect, or we hope that Norfund will be one of those co-investors with us as we explore new technology.
I mean, I think NGOs have a critical role to play in this. One of those ways is it's the voice of our conscience, right? And it's very important that you continue to play your role and to not let us lose focus on the big goals at hand. What you said that resonated with me is, there are no jobs on a dead planet, right? So it's very important the role that you play to keep us honest and to keep us pushing for a more sustainable future.
Perfect. Thank you, Dilanka, and thank you, Kobe.
Thank you.
I think there was a lot of important points raised here and a lot of things we've learned. But one thing that I think is very clear is that we need all of these actors, including the companies, the NGOs, and the investors, to collaborate and support each other to achieve these ambitious goals. So yes, thank you to Dilanka from Hela, Kobe from CBI, Anja from Future in Our Hands, and Ellen from Norfund.